Nigeria's Vice President Kashim Shettima has called for sweeping reforms to the United Nations system and pressed for a permanent seat for Nigeria on the Security Council. Speaking on behalf of President Bola Tinubu at the 80th United Nations General Assembly in New York on Wednesday, Shettima also expressed Nigeria's backing for a two-state solution for Israel and Palestine and demanded fairer rights over Africa's mineral wealth. He said that the Security Council can only regain credibility by reflecting the realities of today and not those of 1945. Director, Abuja School of Social and Political Thought, Dr. Sam Amadi, joins us now to examine takeaways from Vice President Shettima's speech at the UN General Assembly this year and how well they reflect the country's position on crucial global issues. Good to have you with us, Dr. Amadi.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
All right. So what were the major cues for you on Nigeria's speech at the UN General Assembly, and was it impactful?
Well, yes, I mean, impact will be outcome, or perhaps, first, let's say, a good speech. I mean, the Vice President is good. He has the gift of speaking. He spoke very well. The themes he touched on are common themes of Nigerian foreign policy, statements since even during the First Republic when Amadi Bello gave that powerful, Nigeria has come of age, powerful speech about Pan-Africanism, and even under the military when Murtala Mohammed also re-emphasized. So the key themes have remained the same. Nigeria historically has been non-aligned, in the sense that Nigeria, during the Cold War, Nigeria was neither pro-East or pro-West in a deep sense. Nigeria perhaps played more with the US and the Western capitalist states, but essentially committed to the so-called non-aligned movement. I think the Nigerian presidential speeches at the UN have reflected that trend, but they come strong on a few things. One, of course, the demand for a permanent seat for Africa at the Security Council, which Nigeria has always aimed at. We've faced some competition from Egypt, South Africa, and one or two African countries who, in some sense, think they deserve. But Nigeria has always made the case that it deserves more. I mean, the fact that 1 out of every 5 Africans is a Nigerian, the fact of Nigeria's size and economy, and very, very big role he has played in African affairs, especially with peacekeeping and the fight for both independence and even the creation of both the OAU and now AU. So that team resonates and made a case as expected. On the Palestinian question, I think Nigeria has, under the last 2 administrations, somewhat tilted towards a lot more, maybe if you like, robust support for Palestinian cause and Middle East to falling slightly, somewhat in support of Middle East and, of course, Palestinians. And so, again, Nigeria has maintained its support. It looks for the Palestinian statehood. It's now like maybe perhaps a general, a momentum. Most countries are signing up, except the US and Israel, and of course, maybe Italy and a couple of other states, Australia and so on. I think basically, another issue about debt relief is ironic after the historic relief under President Obasanjo. We are still back to this. I'm not sure how much this resonates even with Africans. I mean, we are cap in hand, always borrowing, and then we'll always come back to say debts hobble development. And of course they do, but the question is, have we been prudent? Have we really looked inwards to generate capital formation for economic development? And even with the debts we've entered into, debt agreements, have they been well considered, and have we used those debt monies borrowed to finance development? The notion in the 1960s about international development as form of economic development strategy was that we need from Arthur Lewis and other scholars that you need to have at least 14% national saving. And with the poverty, the lack of capital, the idea was this will be an infusion of capital for industrial development. So, but we're using this borrowed money for selfish purposes, wisdom, corruption. And so I don't think that message has a lot of traction, even among Africans. But on the whole, I think a good speech, from the Nigerian president through his vice president.
And if we take the UN General Assembly meeting, it happens every year, we're present every year. How would you define Nigeria's global standing at this moment in the context of us asking for a permanent seat? How likely is that, given how we're seen, or how are we seen by the rest of the world, rather?
I think the truth is that Nigeria has diminished quite significantly in terms of its stature. I mean, apart from the earlier First Republic, I think the golden era was President Obasanjo, who was somewhat highly respected by both the American president, the president, and was key African leader. I don't think we were anywhere near that position. Interestingly, we are lucky that there seemed not to be a leader in Africa with the stature of Obasanjo or the stature of even Tata Mbeki. They would have dwarfed, Nigeria would have been dwarfed, because we are having the lowest level of international leadership, or continental. We don't have it. I mean, we failed, in my view, with ECOWAS in terms of, being in charge when the three countries called our bluff and went off their way, and actually growing in popularity, growing in traction, doing better in terms of perception than us. So public diplomacy, we are very bad right now, very bad. Our economic fortunes, our crisis at home, the perception of it's not even, every country goes through crisis, but look, the way you go through the crisis, the stories around your own crisis defines whether you are seen as that respectable. So, in spite of our patriotism, everywhere in Nigeria who understands foreign policy, we know that Nigeria does not look very respectable. African countries, they may not be better than us in terms of our economy. Of course, we're now fourth, and maybe we can get to third in the next assessment. They're not really seen at Nigeria as, that beacon, that hope. In the days of peacekeeping, Nigeria played key role, and so even if Nigeria was floundering in other ways, they had to respect the fact that Nigeria was bailing them out of military rule, of internal crisis. But right now, there's just nothing we're doing for Africa. We're not boasting the image. We're not like the guys speaking for them. South Africa took on a big fight with Israel. No matter how you think about it, that was historic, that was great. They went to the big stage, they delivered, got a judgment. So if you are not a Nigerian, I'm going to assess these two countries. Which one really represent Africa? Which one is that leader? I'm surprised. I might think it's South Africa, because the role the president has played, the role the government of South Africa has played, the role they keep playing in BRICS, they're more visible. Nigeria basically is missing. There's nothing Nigeria really commands in terms of, our private sector cultural ambassadors are great. Music, we are up everywhere, literature. So you might say that at the level of cultural, branding, Nigeria is top notch. Our everything about our culture, our music, our art, our knowledge system, our scholars, maybe they are very competitive globally in Africa. But in terms of public diplomacy, in terms of the public leadership, Nigeria has diminished significantly. And on that basis, I don't even think that Africans are really, circle around Nigeria. And Nigeria, if they go into a fight with South Africa and Egypt on that seat, we risk losing that seat right now.
All right, Dr. Amadi, which is food for thought here. If we're having shortcomings regarding public diplomacy here, then why are we still agitating for the UN Permanent Council, Security Council bid in that regard? And what will it take?
That's a good question.
Yes.
I think it's a great question, because if you ask me, I will agitate. It would be a tragedy of epical dimension if the seat is given as not Nigeria in terms of our historical importance, in terms of our size, in terms of our population. I mean, you just can't think about Africa without thinking about Nigeria. In 1960, when we became independent, the Time magazine put it on it was front cover. Nigeria was like, this is now that hope of Africa, the black nation that will redeem the black race. So if you wake up, if somebody died in the 1980s and 1970s, 80s, and woke up in 2025 and hear that Nigeria didn't get that seat and another African country got it, like, it's not possible. So we are fighting because historically we ought to have that seat, and I think that's the point. But the tragedy is that we are in a position where we are weak, the weakest position we have been ever. And so what we should be doing right now is to say, how do we bolster up the Nigerian brand? And two things quickly. Democracy, even with all the struggle, has been one of the areas, you see countries like Ghana somehow stand shoulder above Nigeria because Ghana is small relatively, but Ghana has a sharper brand when it talks about good governance, democracy, elections. Nigeria has very bad reputation. So if in 2027 we get it right and get a democracy election that people will applaud, it doesn't matter who wins. And you move from this electoral autocracy classification under the Verity of Democracy report and get to maybe hybrid or moving towards full democracy. That's restoration. Secondly, if we begin to have our elites kind of have some developmental consensus, and they speak about Nigeria in a manner that suggests that even though we are struggling, we are moving the right direction, that creates a change. And then the Nigerian cultural ambassadors, the artists, the musicians, and every one of us in the social media, the great influencers, begin to now feel a sense of hope, resurgence of hope about the country. That will change the game radically. So Nigeria ought to be the country occupying that seat. But in the real world of real politics, ought does not amount to is. So Nigeria could lose it because Nigeria is diminishing, but Nigeria ought to be there because Nigeria has the historic legacy, the resources, and the narrative even. I mean, it's like legacy, folklore. Anybody in the world will say, oh, Nigeria, that's a country that shows so much promise. That's a country that was heading the Elders Council under Obasanjo. That was a country that was a frontline state in terms of no-allied movement. That's a country that fought for the southern countries like Namibia and all that. That was a country that led the issue around Pan-Africanism and the issue around the independence of African colonies. That's anybody who will say, well, that country ought to be on that seat. But the question is, but that country is now carrying a lot of connotation and a lot of, the scent, the smell around the country isn't that good. It's not the best. So smaller countries, even Rwanda, is head up in many ways. Maybe a dictator, maybe not too democratic, but a very strategic, clear-minded, coherent, and well-structured leadership. So these are the things that we are missing. And I think it's sad and tragic that a country like Nigeria, somebody will be second-guessing our merit to occupy that position. Even with all these problems, I think we ought to be there. It will be a disservice to the memory of great Nigerian leadership in Africa if the seat is given and it's not occupied by Nigeria.
A lot needs to be done in that respect. Dr. Sam Amadi, Director, Abuja School of Social and Political Thoughts, we'd like to thank you for your thoughts on those issues. Good to have you with us.